Hey everyone, welcome back to Horsetooth Cinema. Today I'm going to be reviewing Men, the new film from Alex Garland. Before I get into the review, can we all just agree that, Men is one of the worst titles in a very, very, very long time? Men? What the fuck were they thinking? It's like, anybody remember John Carter? Who wants to go see a movie called John Carter? Men stars Jessie Buckley as a woman who has recently lost her husband due to a suicide, and she goes to a remote house to grieve and recover. But while she's there, she meets a series of men who quickly reveal that there might be something sinister there. So this film was directed by Alex Garland, who of course made Ex Machina and Annihilation, both sci-fi films. Ex Machina was a really, really interesting exploration of consciousness and what it means to be human, very much I think in the mode of something like Blade Runner. And I think Annihilation was one of the best cosmic sci-fi horror films in recent years. I remember thinking that his aesthetic for the film was a big improvement on Ex Machina, which was a lot more like stripped down and everything. And I just remember having a lot of questions after the movie, but questions that a good sci-fi film should leave you with. Watching Men, I found myself really surprised and somewhat shocked that the same director who made those two films made this one. I really did not like this film, and I found it to be a gargantuan step down mostly in terms of the writing compared to his other two films. So there are a couple positives to this film though, and I want to talk about those first, as always. So for one, as always with Garland, I think this is a really beautiful looking movie. The color contrast choices really stuck out to me, really contrasting the green exterior of this environment with the red interior of the house. I feel bad for colorblind people, but I thought it was a really good aesthetic choice. It kind of works with the metaphor that they're going for, where she has eaten the forbidden fruit, and you have this green exterior like the tree, and then you have the red like the apple on the inside of the house. And the film also has a lot of surrealist sequences. I'm particularly thinking of the church scene or the tunnel scene. Those scenes look really good and are really, really well filmed. It's a treat for the eyes, basically. And I think most importantly, the film has a really good lead actress at the center of it. Jessie Buckley is just great in this film. She's the only character in the movie with any real dimension or depth, and I think a lot of it has to do with just her performance. The way she unraveled in certain scenes is very mesmerizing to watch. And in most scenes, she's the only character with any subtlety, which I think really works, especially since her character is, quiet, grieving, very melancholic. But I think that's about all the positives I have to say about this film for right now. Again, I really did not like it. I think this is one of the worst horror films that A24 has ever released. And let's get into that aspect of it, which is does it succeed as a horror film? And my answer is a resounding fuck no. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I was really, really unaffected by the horror in this film. And before you say well, you only like, jump scares or whatever, it's I really enjoy a good, slow burn horror film, something where the horror is a bit more cerebral, The Witch, for example, is one of my favorite horror films ever. And I mean, a lot of horror films that are older than that, that I really love, are, the things that aren't exactly traditional horror films that come out today. So it wasn't that. But I can understand that if you're kind of a average moviegoer audience member, and that is what you're looking for in a horror film, then you will also be disappointed by this, because there isn't really anything like that traditional horror in this film. No, what I mean is that the A24 cliche horror movie stuff did not work at all. So I think to deconstruct this, there are many different ways of making a good horror film. One is to keep it really simple and stripped down, where you're just kind of really focused on the terror itself. I'm thinking of something like Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But another way is to use ideas that are scarier in a deeper way, have those scary ideas sort of anchor the film, and use the aesthetic of the film, the scary aesthetic, to bring that horror to the surface. So that's what Men opts for. That second option, as opposed to the just sort of traditional terror sequence that something like Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre would do. But it completely fails at having a scary idea to anchor its aesthetic. As many people have pointed out, the thesis of the film is literally just men bad. But there's nothing in the film to really bring nuance to this, or clarify what it is exactly about men that can be scary, especially to a woman like Harper. What the film thinks is scary about men is incredibly shallow and monotonous, so I don't really feel anything when I'm watching it. I think maybe one jump scare got me, but that's about it. And again, that's a really cheap thing to get. Also, in order to anchor this men bad thesis, There's a subplot in the film involving Harper's husband who committed suicide. Basically, he said that he was going to kill himself if she divorced him, and he ended up doing that. When he finally did it, she obviously is very haunted by this. But the problem with it is that the film doesn't really know how to handle this in a way that makes it scary for the audience. Suicide's a very sensitive subject, and obviously I think it's a really bad thing to blame somebody for somebody else committing suicide. And I don't think the film is trying to do that, obviously. And for that reason, it's obviously not her fault, so she doesn't have a logical reason to feel responsible. But you could still say that, it could still feel that way to her in maybe a way that's just a bit more visceral and less logical. But the problem is that the film is actually really wishy-washy on if she does feel that way or not. There's a scene in the film where one of the men that she meets kind of suggests that maybe she's responsible for it. And she basically just tells him to fuck off for suggesting it. So she's very, defensive of it. And then in other scenes, she does seem like she's genuinely very affected by it. You never really get a sense about how she really feels about it. It's just how she projects herself to others. And so there isn't really a sense that she's genuinely haunted by this. So everything that the film is trying to throw at you to kind of, bring this horror to the surface doesn't really work because you're not sure if it actually is terrifying to the main character. The film also has a lot of biblical imagery, and one of the, archetypes that it's going for is sort of the idea of the original sin, looking at something like Adam and Eve, for example, when she takes the apple from the tree. Harper does this at the beginning of the film, and one of the men jokes that that apple is the forbidden fruit. Some people might look at that idea and just sort of dismiss it in general as that's stupid, you should never, go for that as your metaphor. But I actually think that metaphor can be done well. I just don't think it is here. I think if you look at a film like Lars von Trier's Antichrist, which, whatever problems that film has, I know it comes off as really pretentious, but I think that there really is a lot of real substance in that movie. The reason the original sin thing works in that film is that the woman in the film actually has sinned. Her negligence allowed her son to be killed. Whereas in Men, she literally just walks up to the tree and takes the apple. There's nothing, it's not even tied in that well to her guilt that she feels over the suicide. It's just it's a very literal thing. She just takes the apple from the tree. So there's nothing that really anchors it to the actual plot of the film. It's very obvious imagery for a metaphor that ultimately falls flat. Similar to the Darren Aronofsky film Mother, actually. In both Men and Mother, the whole, original sin of woman thing, it's very obvious that that's what they're going for, but because it only has meaning in the metaphor as opposed to, real meaning in the film, there's nothing to actually really bring it to life. So as I mentioned in Men, Harper keeps coming into contact with a bunch of different men that are scaring her, and they're all played by Rory Kinnear. They look different, obviously, but you can always tell it's him. I have very mixed feelings on his performance overall because, for one, he has a lot of range since he has to play 10 different characters. But on the other hand, it's a really bad choice, I think, to have him play all of these people. And so the effect of it doesn't work. I think the intention was that if he plays all of them, it just becomes a bit more surrealistic and horrifying because you're like, what is going on here? But I think the effect that it actually created was just predictability and monotony. It's like every time you see him, the film is telling you that you should be scared right now, which is the worst way to create a scare. If you want to alienate your audience and have them not be scared, tell them they should be scared. Also, I think that a lot of his performances kind of border on farce at times. I mean, there's a lot of scenes that are a lot funnier than they are scary, at least for me. Lastly, I do want to get into the ending of the film. Really, the last 20 minutes is what I want to talk about. If you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm about to get into, but I just thought that sequence was incredibly monotonous and repetitive. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a sequence towards the end that's meant to be very disturbing and climactic in terms of the imagery, but it just goes on for so long that honestly, it fails to produce, I think, the disturbing factor that it intended. I thought it was really, really funny, personally. And again, it kind of reminded me of Darren Aronofsky's Mother, because in that film there's also this long sequence 20 minutes before the film's over that is meant to be completely shocking and disturbing, but it just goes on for so long and it's so over the top that honestly to me it just kind of came off as more funny than it was disturbing. Where, again, Lars von Trier's Antichrist, because it's kind of broken up a little bit. And in Antichrist, there's real tension in terms of like what's literally happening on screen in those last 20 minutes. So, yeah, I just kind of think that Men and Mother fail where Antichrist succeeds in this kind of movie. So overall, I just thought this was incredibly disappointing considering how much I really like Garland's other two films. And it sucks because I think to a large extent he does understand horror. I think Annihilation, for example, using cosmic horror, the sort of fear of the unknown, as well as elements of like body horror and the horror of nature. I think he really can. I think he has a good horror film in him. I just really think he failed at bringing it out here. So I'm excited to see what he does next, but I'm also a little bit more concerned than I was before I saw this movie. I was genuinely shocked as to how much this one fell flat for me. I'm gonna give it 1.5 stars. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, you can like it down below and subscribe to the channel. I've got more content coming out soon, and I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.